Hello, welcome to Honest-Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob, and today is a big special day. It's Christmas, but I'm joined by Mr. Darren Watson.
Hello, lovely. I'm here in the studio.
What, in all its glory?
In all its glory. All its terrifying glory.
What's your favourite bit, the hole in the roof or the full 6-foot reindeer outfit?
The special shit I had in the dark.
Way to start the show off, I think. You're going to have to put a bleeper in it.
Oh, yeah, of course. This is family friendly now, isn't it? This isn't the list diaries.
No, it's okay. Don't worry. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So me and Darren today are going to be recording a whole bunch of stuff, but specifically on the subject of deployment.
My fave.
My fave. There's a deep individual love. Me and Darren have been talking about this for a long while. I'm really happy Darren's come up. After this, or as part of this, you'll see there might be some video shots of us going through some intricate elements of deployment as well. And so we're going to have a kind of holistic approach to what deployment is, and hopefully it'll expand the articles that you can find on the Honest Wargamer website under the deployment category. So if you click the workbook and you click, you'll see that there's some subheaders, for instance, scout, move, redeploy. And inside the workbook, I really did go into, I thought, some detail about why deployment was so important.
It's very useful.
But what we now are going to be talking about is our individual experiences, some anecdotes, and hopefully some life lessons people are going to take from it.
And what we've taken.
And what we've taken from it, absolutely. So, Darren, do you want to start me off with why you think it's so important?
Deployment is, you can win or lose a game in deployment, can't you? Straight from the off. It's your first opportunity to gauge your opponent. It's your first opportunity to establish dominance. We spoke about you.
We're going to talk about that.
You put that earlier, didn't you? And you're able to really put your game plan into motion. You've got to be able to adapt, and you've got to be able to establish if you can get your plan into motion straight away and prevent your opponent's plan, then you're going to be the one that's relaxed. They're going to be the one that's under pressure. You're going to be one asking the questions, and they're going to be the one answering them. And 9 times out of 10, the person that is making the easiest decisions and asking the hardest questions for their opponents is going to be the one that wins. So yeah, very important.
Yes. So over the nearly 2 years now of doing live coverage, but the last year obviously is super ramped up, been all around the world, and also
you're a busy man, aren't you?
I've also done coverage for 40k. So I think that this conversation is actually applicable, and some of the headings that we've got are so applicable to any game system or any tabletop war game that you want to play, that it's really valuable. But that said, I watch the beginning of tons of games, obviously. Now, I might not have played as many games this year as I would have liked, but I've watched...
me neither.
Yeah, but I've watched as many...
Thousands.
A lot. And what I think is also really interesting, and I don't know, Darren, how you feel about this, because you did a bit of coverage this year, is when you play a game of Warhammer, you or I, or you as a listener, play a game of Warhammer, there's always an element of you are half of the story. Mm-hmm. When I'm watching people play Warhammer, it's two alien elements playing against each other in ways that I wouldn't play. How did you find that experience?
It's completely different. Being commentating and watching the games at Facehammer, and then also it was a bit more intimate when you're a table boss. You're actually there, and you're constantly thinking about what you would do and how your opponent would respond. And when they don't quite do what you would do, it gives you a little insight, doesn't it, into other possibilities that when you're in the game, you're focused in on them, so you don't really think about other ways of playing too much. I found it fascinating.
Good. Good. Me too. All right. So yeah, I think I see the biggest mistakes happen at deployment, and I think that there's a variety of reasons for that. I would say that it goes down to unpreparedness. I would also say that a lot of people just turn up to the tabletop without really a plan. Now, actually, as we get onto it, I think that there's a really interesting conversation that could be had where there's the unpreparedness, which gives someone no plan in the first turn. Mm-hmm. Then there is the utter preparedness, which is a mistake.
Give you tunnel vision.
It gives you tunnel vision to the open-ended no plan. However, with the ability to adapt.
That's typically what drunk people thrive on.
And insane Warhammer hosts. So so let's start talking through it. So you win or lose a game, Now, like I know there are some subjects. Like, can you identify? Because I tried to do it in the workbook. Can you identify? Do you think what you mean by win or lose? Like what is it that you're trying to achieve at deployment? Like, do you know what you're trying to achieve? I know that's a big question to ask straight off.
It is, yeah. So what I'm trying to achieve is I want to be as relaxed as possible. I want my opponent to have made as many decisions as possible and me to have made the minimum amount. Because decision of fatigue in Warhammer is a big thing. You ask someone 100 questions, they're going to get one of those wrong, and that could be the point where you win. If you only ask them 10, then that's less likely to happen. Okay. Do you know what I mean by asking a question?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we should explain it to other people.
Yeah, so you present a problem. You know, I've got this 2-up save juggernaut unit. There's 6 of them, and they're on this objective. You know, how are you going to shift that? Do you need to shift that? Can you put your efforts and your resources elsewhere? So
for me, my approach when I get to the tabletop is I know what my list does. If I take my Chaos Dwarf list as my like my
how many
go-to,
games you played this year with them?
Oh, maybe 100.
Yeah. So you know it.
Yeah, I know it really well. But it's changed enough. Like I've changed the ally section of it quite a bit to adapt, move around, try some things out. But the core part is I had Kadai that had no rend, but they could do a lot of attacks, so weight of dice. And I had the Fireglaves, which did mortal wounds. So I had my units that dealt with armour, and I had my units that dealt with non-armour, but I need to punch a lot of damage through. The Fireglaves could do the same as well, but effectively, and I think probably you can identify units as wanting to do one of those two things in output in Age of Sigmar. It's either, like, there's also defensiveness and other stuff, but let's just deal with those two very simple things. And so when I would get to the tabletop, I would look at which one of my 2 tools I would be trying to apply to my opponent's army. Yeah. And then my opponent's army, which of their tools is good against my tools. As an example, Plague Monks, which are good against most things, fair enough, but something with a lot of attacks are really, really scary for my Kadai because they've got a 5-up ethereal save. Yeah. So they will go and fight something like a Vampire Lord Zombie Dragon or even a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, sometimes unsuccessfully. But they'll even go and try and fight them. Because there's a chance I'm saving some of those.
Yeah. Sometimes you just dice your opponent, don't you?
Absolutely. There's a weakness there and there's a strength there. So I have to decide like what I'm doing. So for me, before I even deploy, I have this like a bit like when you guys do when anyone in the world does team tournaments. There's good matchups.
Yeah.
And that's how I see it. There's good matchups, and now I get into the deployment game because I preload myself with what are my good matchups. There are also a bunch of other questions. Can they deep strike? Can they do these other things? But ultimately, I want to get Unit A versus Unit B because it's a bonus for me. Yeah. And that's how I approach it. Would you say that's what you basically do?
Whilst trying to prevent them getting their Unit A's.
It's your good matchups versus their good matchups. And sometimes you use bait or you try to trade off to get that. Okay, so that's winning or losing the game, and then I think you enter the deployment game, and I think there's loads of things you learn there. So you wanted to talk about, so one of the things we want to talk about was the fact that you can change the outcome of a tough matchup. Yeah, and you have an example of that.
I think you can control it. If I go back to one of my favourite games from my opponent this year. Was probably a strange one. It was the Russian chap at the ETC. We played Russia round 2, I think, and I was pitted against their Sylvaneth player. And there'd been a lot of chat in on WhatsApp groups in the Sylvaneth chat, for example, about how poor this fella's army was. It had no battalions. It was just Alariel. Dreicher. I love Dreicher, by the way, but he's not regarded as any good. She's not regarded as any good. Be correct.
We're so serious, this show. I'm loving it. Yeah.
It's
an important subject. Yeah,
it's important. And it was relocation orb. And on paper, I had 3 bells
So if no one knows, again, I'm just going to I want it for the simplest person or like the person who's newest. Relocation orb is a battle plan that happens where there's one objective and it moves. It starts in the middle of the board and it can either go into basically your deployment or your opponent's deployment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I had the horriblest rat army when rats were king, pre-nerf. So it had 3 bells, it had a warp seer, it had 80 plague monks, it's got all the mortal wound damage in the world, it's got all the reach in the world, it's got warp lightning vortex when it was 36 inch or 37 inch range, whatever whoever fucking wrote that.
Agreed.
It's on paper, rats destroy trees. So I went into that game supremely confident. Now, full disclosure, I did win the game, but I was still very, very impressed by the Sylvaneth player, because what he did effectively was he knew that he was in a bad spot, and he knew his only he understood his outs, which I think is super important in deployment. You need to understand your outs.
So understand your outs.
His only out is if it moves into his deployment. If it goes into my deployment, he can't come anywhere near
Sorry,
me.
what do you mean by out?
Oh, how you win. So it's a poker term, so you understand, you need to get a heart on the river, or you need to get a king on the river, what the odds are, how much you should be betting into that. So when I say understand your outs, ultimately that means how do I win this game? And this matchup for this chap was probably as hard as it could possibly be. And it's very tempting when you deploy to deploy how you always deploy, or to deploy in a set way, and the only way that this chap wins is if the orb moves into his deployment and then keeps moving into his deployment. So it's unlikely. And he sets up in such a way that every single unit is sort of effectively baselined. And I can't show you.
We are going to show them.
Rectangle, he's all along here, basically. My army's across here, and his army's all across there.
Cut to video of us showing. Okay.
And the single unit that he keeps out, it taught me something as well. The only unit he keeps in range of my warp lightning vortex is a unit of 5 tree revenants. Now that's a very tasty unit to try and kill, because they're so good in the late game. They can move anywhere, can't they? And then I take the bait. I cast warp lightning vortex into them. I kill 3 or 4 of them. The other one dies from battle shock, and I think I've done a really good thing, right? In actual fact, I've cast it completely out of position, and Warp Lightning Vortex is incredibly difficult to dispel, isn't it? You need an 8. It's an 8 to cast, so you need a 9 to dispel.
9, yeah.
And it's completely out of position for the rest of the game.
And your army also had no bonuses to dispel it.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, well, the one that was in range to do it wasn't. I think you get Master of Magic gives you +1, but he was completely out of range to do that. So the only thing I could touch was something he controlled, basically my decision. He'd made it so my best spell was probably out of the game, when it was, as it turned out, out of the game for the rest, because he gave me that really tasty unit to try and kill. Unfortunately for him, the relocation orb went into my army, and he had no chance. But he had no chance of getting into my army anyway. Does that make sense?
It does.
If he'd have set up and been aggressive and tried to get into my army,
it was a lose.
It was a lose. I think so. I don't think there's any way he's getting into there. So he hasn't tried to do that. He's thought to himself, right, I'm going to minimise the damage that's coming at me. I'm going to give the Skaven their half of the board. If it comes into my half, I'll fight for it. If not, I'm going to play for secondaries. And I was very, very. He turned what I thought was going to be a breeze into mate, this is a squeaky bum moment every time the orb moved. But for me, the first time it moved into my. But if it had gone the opposite way, I'd have probably lost that game. Yeah, it was good.
Which is huge, right?
I think so. Yeah, I was super impressed by it.
And he did that by not doing anything other than deploying, like, in a almost non-committal way.
It just gave me nothing other than the one unit he gave me. And I realised
one of your strengths.
And so he taught me a lesson there that I should never. I had no business casting it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was
that bloodthirsty. Also, like, denying everything and then just giving you one thing. Like, giving it up on a dinner plate. A good call. Really interesting. A good life lesson to deploying in a way your opponent doesn't want is super, super important. Like, and also I mean, there's so much to say about this. I'm trying to break it down into sections, but good. All right, yeah. So
he gave himself a chance in an impossible game, and he understood that, and I respect that.
Yeah, I think also, yeah, you can put people absolutely off where they need to be, and also if you're deploying, because this current subject is change the outcome of a tough matchup. If you can get I talked about before, if you can get the right matchups of units as well in deployment, that changes a tough matchup, because on paper, like, that unit goes into that unit, you win the game, which a lot of people will do in different WhatsApp groups or Facebook chats or wherever you might do. When you get to the tabletop, your opponent still has to make sure unit A gets to unit B to win that tough matchup, and you can orchestrate it in deployment so that isn't the case. And so, which is why I'm a huge advocate for high drop armies. Like, I actually think that the end game of the race to the bottom, as long as there is never like a truly offensive Alpha Strike army that can defeat, and Alpha Strike is the ability to absolutely win on the first turn.
Yeah.
As long as there's never one of those in the game, and I currently don't think that there is, that doesn't have a counter. The only exception I can think is that Death. The Death Grand Alliance doesn't actually have a technical counter to that what's currently the Hollow Heart Bridge gun line, with the exception of maybe having a gash with his ability to unbind. But then, can you stop a Hollow Heart caster? It's a dice off then. But you can pre-game move with Chaos. You can auto unbind with Order, Destruction. I just don't think. I don't think they're weak enough. I think they're fine. They can pre-game move so far that they can deploy on the backboard. So I think, yeah, you have to make sure you get those right matchups, and you're fine. One of the other things that deployment does is it's a good opportunity to analyze your opponent.
Yes, yeah,
right,
absolutely.
So, like, how do you analyze your opponent on the tabletop?
So if the first thing my opponent asks me is, what are your maximum threat ranges? You know, what synergies have you got? How do your allegiance abilities interact with your own items, interact with your spells? I know I've got a game on, you know. You said earlier, didn't you, about the Sylvaneth dice?
Well, yeah, if I see someone with, like, faction dice, I'm like, I'm in. I am laughing. And similarly, like, if I see anyone who's got a bunch of 3-inch markers or 9-inch markers, I know that they've got their head screwed on. And that's when you're playing someone who you don't know. Because we do generally at events, like, you will often at events, if you're playing in the same places, play people who you know already or play them a bunch of times. Or
you'll have preconceptions about them.
Yeah, like, I can't do anything but play Colin Cochrane and never finish a game. But at the same time, understanding what that opponent is like, because you've got a very short space of time to plan, and whether or not, because there's two tactics, right? There's the person you're playing doesn't really have much nuance or hasn't played the game a lot, which is super acceptable. And if you are one of those people, go play at events.
Yeah.
All day long.
Yeah.
But if they aren't, then more than likely they're not going to be engaging in subterfuge. Like, they're not going to be putting bait out, which is a mistake to make. Like, sometimes you can be overconfident, and you'll see that talked about in war, like treaties on war or politics or anything in life. So you can be overconfident. So always self-check yourself. Don't be a blustering fool. But similarly, you know, those people, you're just like, okay, this is probably just going to be straight on the nose Warhammer.
I've heard you talk about, when you were commentating, look at them lie to each other.
So now that's the other end. When two people get to that top tier, everything that's happening is lying.
Is a lie.
That doesn't mean that they're saying that they hit on threes when they hit on fours.
Oh, yeah, it's not politics.
They'll say things like, oh, that unit's just going to kill that unit. And he wants you that to happen, or he wants you. It's a double bluff. He wants you to think that that's what he wants to happen. It's just, and one of my favorite things about Warhammer, which you don't get in esports, and you don't get in, like, mechanical sports. Is that what we're calling them now? Yeah, traditional sports. Sometimes you don't get actual sports. Well, so you have it in something like American football, where you have different. I don't know if you know much about American football, but they have different formations. So you have offensive formations, defensive formations.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
a wall. I like
Right.
that.
And the offensive formations normally denote that they're going to make a run or they're going to do a throw. And if you are in America, and I'm saying all the wrong words, I don't care. Whereas this is all from having played Madden. Whereas the defensive formation is obviously set up to counter that. Now, some they're to stop blocks. So it doesn't overly matter. But the point is a lot, not a lot of the time, but some of those times that they're fakes. They'll do a fake play or like it's a. Yeah, and so, I've lost
But they're
myself
not talking to each other about it, are they?
No, no, but they are. There is at least some subterfuge. A really good analysis, if you want to go to it, or another good counter, sorry, is poker, where two people know what their cards are and they're using bets as a fake, and then they're talking to each other and lying. So
Trying to hide their ticks.
exactly. So you've got that a lot in that top tier Warhammer when I watch it be played, and even watching someone like yourself to understand the deep level of analysis that someone like yourself might play at when we did coverage at Facehammer. I remember you saying, "Oh, look," 'cause we saw James playing, and James had his knuckles on the tabletop. Yeah, like he had his hands on the tabletop.
Yeah, like a gorilla.
Yeah, just like push, and it was quite clear that like he was
Presenting his
tilted.
chest.
Yeah, he was tilted, but also he was having like some issues. Another really good example, but maybe not of that level, and I'm sorry, Archie, is when Archie just was sat in a chair, hand on head, nearly crying when his Gotrek died.
I can understand that pain.
Yeah, I mean that's not quite the same. But the ability to read all of those bits of information from your opponent, like when you ask them a bunch of questions, I'm sure you do this. You work out whether or not like they know, like what's your threat range of this, and if they have to go look, you're all good.
Yeah, and also I will do that anyway. When I come to the table, if I already know their threat range, to be honest, if I know I'm going into a game as well, let's say it's game 4 and you've seen your matchup the previous day, I've spent a half hour researching what I'm playing, because you get tidbits, don't you, throughout a tournament. If I know the answer to the questions anyway, I'll still ask them, because I'm letting my opponent know I'm here and I know what your stuff does. Do you know what I mean? Or at least you've now told me. So all your little surprises that you're counting on aren't going to work. So you're going to have to come up with something else.
Oh, I do the opposite. Like I want like if there's anything I genuinely don't know, like I'll ask. But like I want them to be comfortable in the knowledge that they're going to do that deep strike. I want it to be like, cool, that's fine. I want you to move.
I get that mindset, yeah.
Yeah, because I think, as we talked about earlier on in the show, I think those players who are in that middle category of they enact their battle plan.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to put some fake numbers on this now.
Okay.
A large percentage, I'm just going to put, a large percentage of the player base is pick up plan, enact plan.
I think that's fair to say. Otherwise, you wouldn't see the same people at the top all the time.
No, that's different. I think dynamic gameplay is the genuine winner. I think people who use very strong army lists then jump to the next very strong army list are people who enact plan. Yeah, unit does X.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah.
They go forward. Whereas I think the I don't know this right word, dynamism maybe, or dynamism.
Dynamism.
Yeah.
I'm not great at words here.
Of decision making comes at deployment, and I learn loads about my opponent and whether or not they are going to be someone who is going to make those sorts of plays. Now you can get bad. You might be sat there going, "Do you know what, Rob? I'm a terrible judge of character." Yeah, FYI, so am I. But it's an interesting game to try to play and add on, right, and learn that info. Are there any other tricks you use to try and learn things about your opponent?
Tricks I'm trying to learn to use I focus more on trying to establish myself at the table rather than. It's just an innate skill. No, there's no trick to it. I guess there's no. Like I say,
So I think good things to do: ask questions.
Struggling here.
So you ask a bunch of questions, and then they need to be a bunch of basic things like what are the threat ranges of your models, both shooting and combat. Like what's your longest charge in the first turn? Yeah. If you're talking about deployment, can you deep strike? Yeah, anything.
Yeah.
That's always good. Can you make any? If you can deep strike, can you make any moves after a deep strike? Yeah. So that means that you're only ever going to have to screen 9 inches, as opposed to it's 9 inches, but then they're going to move d6 or whatever it might be.
Do I need to defend my backfield, or can I be more aggressive?
Yeah, those are some simple ones. Like, can you deep strike? What's your largest threat range? And then also, what's the threat range on endless spells, etc. How many wizards you got? How many can you cast? Where are they? Like, because they're going to go down. Are you going to want to unbind them, or do you want your wizards actually out of unbind range? So you're going to look for that. What are the terrain pieces on the board? That's super important. Like, where do you want to go? Which side? Why?
That's just a really good point to pick on there. Just from the off the table side, you're not a horrible person if you make your opponent move sides.
Or you can always just flip terrain.
Yeah. There is that. If it's your advantage to move over to the other side, move over to the other side, because it's a double-barreled sword, isn't it? It gives your opponent an advantage and it gives you a disadvantage.
I really enjoy the term double-barreled sword. I like that used more in the future.
Is that what I said?
Well, a two-sided double-edged sword,
double-barrels. Fuck me.
Double-barreled shotgun.
I had to travel here 7.5 hours yesterday.
I like double-barreled shotgun. That's my preference.
I like the way you've got me here as an expert, and I say double-barreled sword. Brilliant.
I think it works.
Nailed it.
I think it works. So yeah, change. So the good opportunity to analyze your opponent, and also ask a bunch of questions about your opponent's army,
and try and mask your ability, I guess, as well.
See, I don't think. See, you're right.
Mind you, I don't. I try to let them think that I'm a god. I want you to be under as much pressure as possible. Right. I want you to think that. That's why I try and make myself as big as possible, as jolly as possible, and as engaging as possible, and as domineering as possible.
We'll move on to that now, because maybe that's involved. So establishing dominance is also another side of that. So not only do you want as much information from your opponent, and whether or not you want to do either Darren's tactic, where you want to let your opponent know that you crushingly know everything about them, or mine, where I want you to sneakily fall into my trap.
But yeah, both have their merits.
They do. Because I also like to play the dumb fool. That's who. Like, I'm loud. I'm sure you guys know that if you've ever listened to the show. And I play, but I think about this game a lot, and on the tabletop, and I get there, and I'm pretty serious. But I pretend like I'm not. I play the fool, I act big, I make jokes, I take photos. I've got some dumb models for you to giggle at.
Pretend you're not paying attention.
Yeah, pretend I'm not paying attention, and all I'm ever doing is paying attention. I would say it's an ADHD autistic skill that I've developed through my life, where I've had to do it with everything in my life. So it's not really an intentional Warhammer skill, but I'm leaning on skills I've developed in my life to play the way I play. Which is why when you play other players who play counter to that, me and Tony Moore played a game years ago now, maybe 3 years ago, and I cannot get a fucking joke. It upsets me when I can't get a single smile or giggle out of my opponent. I was like, just fucking laugh, man.
But when you do get one out of Tony,
the sun shining.
Yeah.
All right.
Like an abused parent showing attention to his card.
Exactly. Right.
Abusive parent, rather.
And I think, and that was an interesting game for me, because it was very much, I couldn't get a read off him. He was stonewalling me like a big poker face. And what I try and do is ingratiate myself and get into that headspace of someone by us having laughs, telling jokes. And I'm sure some people find it incredible.
Did he throw you off?
No, he didn't throw me off, because everything I'm doing is subterfuge. It's a lie. Yeah. I'm just there, I'm just being bigger and gregarious. But underneath it's where I'm you talked about I'm knackered on the end of a Saturday.
Yeah.
And because it feels very much like I'm on, which is like an acting term, or a showbiz term, which is such a stupid thing to do. But when I used to do live coverage for Games Workshop, it was the same thing, because I was a representative for a company. So after I'd done a stream or before, loads of people come up and say hello to me, and you have to be only gracious and nice.
Yeah.
Now, I would like to think that I'm a gracious and nice person anyway. Yeah.
But sometimes it's an act.
Well, sometimes you're knackered.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you're furious, or someone has made you really fucked off that day, or you're heartbroken, or who knows what situation you're in.
Yeah.
But you don't have the opportunity to be sad. You have to be on. Yeah. And then afterwards you just decompress, which is what mental health is, and everyone talks about.
That's why I go out and get smashed on Saturday.
Because you're decompressing, right? Yeah. Anyway, so that's how I establish dominance. I be really just loud, big, ask a bunch of questions at the full. And is that your similar process?
Well, letting them know that I know what's going on,
right?
And making my deployment as trying to make it as tidy as possible to try to present. I'm not a naturally. You've seen me play, haven't you? I'm quite scatty, so it's something I've got to really work at. Being tight on deployment, etc., making sure everything's measured out. I'm the opposite to you in that regard. I want my opponent to think that they're in for a game, and I want to stress them out. I want to put as much pressure on them mentally as possible, and so that I can relax into the game.
Right.
So that's the thinking behind letting them know everything rather than playing the full. Whether that's interesting to see which one would win out, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And there are other, as we talked about this, Tony, right? Stonewall. Yeah. Now, this doesn't. I would never advocate for intentionally misleading your opponent, like on what things actually do.
No, never.
Yeah, like as in the facts. But then your opinion on the facts are very, very different.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like this could beat that. This is going well. Oh, you've definitely got the game here. Like that's a strong move. I don't really do a lot of that with my opponent. I'm more just like. I try and get them anywhere else than in the game because my brain's doing this. Just imagine there's a machine just ticking over watching the game, and then I'm just like, "How'd you get here? Where you been? How long you been playing Warhammer? What's your favorite army? Do you like that model? I really like this."
Trying to interrupt them.
Yeah, and it's all under the guise of having a great time. Yeah, so and that's the odd thing about sports votes as well. Because really, like, is that guy being a laugh? But I'm just telling you right now publicly, that I'm having a laugh to distract you from playing well. Yeah. So, and
you're a terrible sport,
and you're doing the same thing. You're doing the same thing. You're like I'm sure you shout football. Darren's pretty famous for shouting football. Yeah, chanting your own name.
I do. Yeah.
Getting other people to chant your name.
Oh, so when things are going well, yeah, exactly. When you've got a bit of momentum behind you, again, that's all about
dominance.
It's all about rising yourself up, keeping yourself stress-free. Celebrate any good thing because life's too short.
And don't be negative about the things that go badly.
There's no point stressing yourself out because it shuts your mind down, and then you don't have. I'm a massive advocate of that. Just find joy in all situations, and the point of that isn't because I'm a nice guy. It's because I want to keep the stress levels in my brain as low as possible.
Well, there's. I mean, you don't have to believe me. Just go into Google, but there is tons of evidence that proves that stress leads to poor decision making.
It closes the front of your mind down, your cerebral cortex. The most advanced part of your brain will literally close down. It's the same reason when you're shouting at someone and they're struggling to get their words out. You're putting them under so much stress they literally can't think. So that's why you should never shout at someone if you genuinely want to improve the situation. And it's the same in war games. Someone rolls that 666. They needed a 666 not to die. High five them. Say well done. Because pissing and moaning about it is not gonna. It's gonna close your mind down.
It's got nothing to do with your opponent. It's to do with you.
Yeah, exactly. Give yourself every opportunity to feel relaxed and in control.
Okay. All right. So moving on to understanding the opponent's game plan. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Also, hold on. With establishing dominance, you don't have to necessarily So there are loads of terms for this. Is your opponent tilted? Yeah. Are you the beat down in the game? That's a Magic the Gathering term. There's loads of terminology for it, but effectively what it is to be in the most efficient headspace that you can be, while your opponent is the most inefficient headspace that they can be in order to win the game. Now, I would never advocate anything that's unsportsmanlike, but a little point to read about if you ever want to is a really famous chess match between Spassky. It happened in 1968, and what's the other fella's name? Anyway, but effectively an American fella, and
he was up and coming, wasn't he?
It was a young up and coming fella. It was a chess grandmastership, and it went from the Russian guy was. This is during the Cold War. The Russian guy's going to crush the American guy. Long story short, the American guy takes ages, doesn't turn up, is late on the first day, is late for the first game, intentionally makes a mistake, gets caught, rallies back, doesn't even turn up for the second game, forfeits, because it's quite a few games, and then starts to play with a whole bunch of moves he's never used before, because the Russian guy studied him tons. And it turns from this Russian guy being in Reykjavik, prepped, ready to crush his American opponent, to 9 games later, he's asking the KGB to look at the chairs because he thinks that there's hallucinogens in it, and he also won't look at his opponent because he thinks he's hypnotizing him with his eyes. And this isn't just like the guy's first day out at a tournament. This is a world-class chess champion of many years, and he got put under such intense pressure by the American fella that he eventually quit the entire series, and I think never played. Oh, he played chess again, but he never recovered effectively his professional career.
Yes, that's what I said.
Which is and we play a game of mental acuity as opposed to any physical acuity.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really interesting subject. Take the time to research that, but I think it's a really interesting subject to come up. And also develop your own play style, right? Whether or not you're going to be like the monastic, like silent sentinel that is the Iron Golem, Tony Moore, or you're going to be gregarious like me and Darren. Whether or not it's in different ways, just work out your system, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's a great example of decision fatigue, isn't it? So that's huge in this game. There's so many decisions to make. Again, deployment is your first opportunity to make your decisions as easy as possible and make your opponent's decisions as hard as possible. Mm-hmm. And again, the person who's asked the more frequent questions and has put their opponent under more pressure, they'll have an easier time throughout the game.
Mm-hmm. So then the other one is, which I think we covered a bit, but is understanding your opponent's game plan. That becomes, I think, apparent in deployment. So as I said, before you get to deployment, I think you need to decide what you're trying to achieve at deployment.
Yeah.
And then as you're doing deployment, you need to understand what your opponent is going to do. And I think one of the key elements there is knowing whether or not your opponent gets the choice to go first. That's always huge. That should affect your game plan before you even start to deploy.
Yeah.
So if you haven't asked how many, like if someone hasn't asked me how many drops I am before we even start deploying,
you've got an easy time of it.
Yeah, we're having a great time. But if someone has asked and we both know, I know my opponent knows that they're going to go first or not. And so they're deploying the best. I prefer my opponent having the choice all the time because I know that they've got the choice. So they have to play like they are tricking me. They have to seem like, if they want to go first, they have to seem like they're not.
Yeah.
And if they're not going to go first, they have to seem like they might go first. Otherwise, like...
So and you've got more opportunities to interrupt that decision, haven't you, if you get to put 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 units down after them. So, and that's your ultimate goal there, isn't it? To try and get them to change their game plan.
Always halfway through. So you've got a good example of this, right?
Yeah, so I played the American team captain Bill at Gulking Bill. Yeah, what a ledge! At the ETC, it was my first ETC game. What pressure! I've got to play the American team captain, and he was using Slanesh. And we're playing 3 points of arcane power, and that deployment is an information gathering exercise, isn't it? Like you say, and I would say 3 or 4 drops in, he says to me, I was using Skaven, he was using Slanesh, and he says to me, so if I deploy my Marauders here, you're not going to be able to get your Warp Lightning Vortex anywhere near my chaps. Now, I was assuming it was 3 points of arcane power, like I say. I was assuming he was going to go first, take all 3 points, and then make me have to grind him off, and then use his depravity to keep coming back, so that I'd have a really difficult game. So I was expecting to go second, and 2 or 3, well, like I say, 3 or 4 drops in, he's asked me that question. He's not going second, he's given me the first turn. He's going with the old Slanesh thought of give them the first turn, which gives them the opportunity to double. Which is great, but I think that was a mistake in that situation. And my game plan went from setting up to go second to setting up to going first and being very aggressive. And that's exactly what happened. He gave me the first turn. And he let me know that by asking that question, which he could have just kept to himself. He could have just worked it out himself, didn't have to... Or you could be even prepared for that before the game. You should know how you deploy to stop Warp Lightning Vortex getting into you. Does that make sense? Yeah. This was back in August, so this is when Warp Lightning Vortex had.
But there are a bunch of comparable
reach.
things. Everblaze Comet for Stormcast is a good example. Yeah, there's a bunch of like very long range endless spells that you can think through. Yeah.
The thinking is ask for intent so that when it comes up, it's not an argument. I get that, but you can be prepared for that and you can have that already in your mind. So I think that was a mistake from Bill, letting me know that I was going first, because then I was able to. My plan was then able to adapt. So yeah, I don't think that. So what was the question you were asking?
Well, so we were talking about understanding your
Yeah,
game plan.
So his game plan. So there, he basically told me that he was going second and I was going first, whereas the opposite is I thought what was going on. So yeah.
Yeah, well, so I had a really great game at Adaptability against Tony P, who does War Scroll Builder, and he had Flesh Eater Courts. This is before the nerf, pretty scary. Brand new book out. They've won like 12 tournaments in a row, and I'm there with Chaos Dwarves. But I fancy my chances. Like, it's tough. It's duality of death. It's super hard. I've got the options. So duality of death is 2 boxes in the left and right hand corner on your deployment, and you have to deploy everything in there, and that's where the objectives are. So it's a tough scenario. Anyway, is that what it was? It might not have been duality of death. I'm going to double check, and then during this video you're going to see which one it actually is. Anyway, long story short, I put most of my army, like 90% of it, into one corner eventually.
Uh-huh.
But the key part was in deployment. Tony showed he did like a little like circle shape, which he put a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist down in front of ghouls, which were a screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, that's like, and then it did it on the other side and kept like, but I had more drops, way more drops. So eventually, like, he had to put his Ghoul Kings down, which is good, because what I wanted to do was put the Corruptor down fairly late. Because the Verminal Corruptor with the Vortex, the Warp-Liner Vortex, and the spell was in my list. Now, that was never meant to be. It doesn't do anything. It will hurt a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, but it won't kill it.
No.
I'd have to be super lucky. Yeah, and I wouldn't kill 2 of them. Again, it would be super lucky. And also, we're deploying so deep that can't really affect his army. His army is also split into 2, so I could put it into one place. Fair enough. But he ended up putting his Ghoul Kings in the middle anyway. But what it was I put it right next to my 70 Fireglaves, so that if he wanted to go and kill it, which he saw it as a big threat, which it was a threat, but I don't think as much as it needed to be, he ends up right in front of all my Fireglaves, which is what I want. So it's a threat he has to take, but it's a threat that I want him to take out. Like, it's a trade that I'm looking to achieve, and put that in. But in deployment, before that ever happens, so already what we're mapping out is what's going to happen in the first turn. But in deployment, I know he gets the choice on who goes first. So what I want to do is constantly keep forcing him to change his game plan. And so he put his screen out. Maybe he's going to go another screen. But what it was a game of, he might be like, he's screening, but there was every opportunity, because his last drops were the 2 Ghoul Kings on Terrorgeist. There was every opportunity that he was just going to frontline them. He could have just it just confused me and obfuscated his plan and be like, oh, that's a screen. But until I saw the actual threats go down on the board, I couldn't. So I had a suboptimal deployment in my deployment, because I had to slowly keep creating screens as if he was going to go first, until it was like, okay, you're not. You've put them behind the screens. But it was never clear, and I don't think he knew until we got into like drops.
But those are the best, though, aren't they?
They're the best games. They're the best.
Well, that's
games.
the best example of deployment, because it's like a tennis match, isn't it?
It is, like, it's a trade 1 for 2. Yeah, absolutely. And so understanding your opponent's game plan sometimes is super easy, sometimes it's super hard.
Or recognising when it changes.
Also,
important. That's a real skill. My best example of that is Game 3, Ben Sava, Blood and Glory, not this year, the previous year. I was using Tyrants of Blood, and he was using Daughters of Cain, his famous Hagnar list that's hardly ever lost. And on paper, I've got no chance in that game whatsoever. But the way that it panned out, I actually was in it until turn 3. I cocked up. But when I originally went down, I thought, right, I'm going to try and go second. And then Ben deployed, and it forced me to go first. So then I deployed, and then I had a chance at going second again, and then he countered me again, and I had to go first. And it turned out I had to go first. So Ben had completely ruined my initial plan, and I just thought that's the best example, or for me, that's my favourite deployment from an opponent. He did very well. I still got back into the game though. and almost beat the bugger. That would have been great, wouldn't it? But yeah, that's the shit. Excuse me. But yeah, that's my favourite time that I've been put on the back foot was by Ben Saber. Some excellent deployment from him.
Yeah, and it can just be done in the deployment phase, right? So yeah, understanding your opponent game plan and knowing your game plan. Again, if you don't have a game plan before you start deploying, I don't think you've lost the game, but you've lost the deployment game. Yeah, so important to have a game plan before you start deploying, and then and then you can say, well, I had a game plan and I lost the deployment game. But I genuinely do see it as that. Like, that's the first part. You recognize, you make your analysis, you understand the deployment, you make your plan, and then you try and enact it. And it can change.
It's sometimes it's got to. You've got to be able to change it.
Well, so that brings on to our next thing, adaptability. Yeah. So I think that goes back to list writing, but also to deployment. Like, what is it about adaptability that you see as being key?
Well, again, if you've got tunnel vision, if you set up the same way you always set up, and your opponent recognises that, and they can manipulate you, can't they? They can take advantage of that. They can make you can dance to their tune if you don't change your plan. I can think of loads of examples where people do the same thing over and over again.
Give me some.
Fire Slayers will typically do the same thing over and over again. Daughters of Cain, will do the same thing.
What's my favourite thing about Daughters of Cain or Sinesh or Flesh Eater Courts is, like, sometimes I don't even have to deploy against them. I'm deploying against the scenario because I know that they have to go where the objectives are. I don't have to, because they've got no shooting, they've got no ranged threat. They can't sit at objective A and project power outwards.
No.
So I can just go, cool, you are going to have to go there. That's the end of the conversation, because you have to it's a scenario game, you have to go to the scenarios.
Yeah.
So, I think the adaptability is in knowing that some of those polarized lists, which have always done incredibly well, because sometimes, like, I've got a combat army, you've got a combat army, yours is just better, fine. But the fact that my opponent has to go to a place, like, in some way, is a huge identifier for how I'm going to play. So my adaptability is the scenario a lot of the time, and also I like to have mixed arms lists most of the time. If I don't have some sort of ranged in there, I feel a little bit like, okay, well, how do I even just pick off little wounded?
How do I manipulate people?
How do you it can be super challenging. So my adaptability is that I often like to look for there's a Gore Grunter list for Iron Jaws that I've got painted up, ready to rock. It's just I don't have any ranged threat.
Oh, you've used it, haven't you? Before?
I used it before the new Iron Jaws book, and it's super fun. Like, it really is. And now they're genuinely terrifying. Like, before it was fun, now they're scary.
Yeah.
But as an army list, I didn't particularly like it because it had no adaptability. My opponent, just in my army list, could adapt.
Could see what it was going to do.
But my list just does what it does. So I normally move away from army lists like that when I'm writing them. So normally when I get to the tabletop, I'm able to adapt. However, if you don't have that, I suppose you have to adapt your tactics.
Well, you can. So take Leo. So bring Ben Saver up again. He really rates Leo as a player because he was using Iron Jaws in a completely different way to how everyone else was using them. He's got that smash and grab army, but he wasn't using it that way. So you can adapt.
He was using it defensively as opposed to offensively, which I know offended Nathan.
Yeah, but he was very good with it.
Yeah.
And it's probably because he was using an army where people would expect them to just run at them. He was deploying and playing with them in a completely different way and taking people by surprise. So he's adapted his tactics, and he could probably turn it on if he needed to. He could use those aggressive tactics, absolutely, couldn't he, if he saw the situation for it. So you're saying that there's that one polarized list and it only does that, but Leo's taken that and not done that with them and been quite successful with it.
Exactly.
So it is possible.
The way to because you need to have either adaptability in the list or at deployment to do what your opponent's not expecting. Also, if you a really good example would be to deploy the one that catches people out a lot, which is a good trick, is deploy super aggressively, knowing you get the choice for first turn. Yeah, your opponent has to deploy super defensively, or they do.
And then you give them.
Just give them the first turn, and then their first turn is effectively super neutered.
Yeah.
And then the mistake there, I hope we'll see if you agree. The mistake there is then, if you are that person, don't then just run into the midfield. Don't do that. Just stay where you are. Just be like, cool. Yeah. Just literally just do Mystic Shield, couple of buffs, and then just give them the turn. Like, which is normally my way of putting them back on tilt. I like take like a 1 minute turn and just give them back the turn, and they're like, okay, which lowers their thinking. So yeah, adaptability. Got any other good examples of adaptability? Do you think?
I'm trying to think. As I've given you a good one of Ben. I'm trying to think of myself. I guess. Did I have one?
No, not in it. Just got adaptability. Be it. That was,
just adapt to your situation. Don't be afraid to change your game plan. Going back to the first one, you've got to be able to. They all sort of tie into each other. Those two, don't they?
Yeah.
You've got to be. Don't get tunnel vision. Don't get big. An example. A tunnel vision would be my game versus Jack Armstrong at the end of the LGT. So he set up, and if you see the pictures that Jack's provided,
we can watch it live. Yeah.
Throughout the tournament, Jack's like taking pictures of what's going on. His deployment was basically the same, and he moved his rats, his 9 storm fiends, to the flank, didn't he, through the Nor hole. Because he'd done that. Well, I can only presume because he'd done that for every game. But that's the reason he lost that game. Because then they were completely. I took out his 2 dudes, his little dudes, so he couldn't go over there and get them
Warlock
back.
Bombardiers.
There you go, Warlock Bombardiers, and that made them not very good at shooting. But they're also completely out of position for the entire game. Then that's 720 points that are doing nothing on that flank, and that I think Jack. That had served him well in other games, but in our game he should have even just run them straight into the middle so that they were always going to be in range later on. Yeah. So I think you've got to be able to adapt. He could have recognised that earlier, and he didn't. But I don't think he would make that mistake again.
No, I don't think so either. I think you're right. I think that goes beyond obviously the first turn. In that adaptability is always really important, which is why I think Age of Sigmar is such a good game. Yeah. But it's applicable to 40k as well.
He deployed to do that, and then
exactly.
It bleeds into your first turn, doesn't it?
And again, if I were you, I would do the opposite. I would obfuscate. I'd make it look like you're going to do X, but then do Y, which it takes a lot. Like you have to. I think that's the key part for me is understand your army list. And then understand what you want to do with it. I think a lot of people don't like. A lot of people put units in, or they hear a unit's good. Like, and if you are new, you're going to just have to go off that information. It takes a while to develop as a skill. But then after that, you have to be like, I'm going to do X with this unit. Like that's what its job is in the game, and then work around that. Understand that, because what you don't have is a unit that does it. A unit that has to do this thing. What you have is a tool who can achieve an outcome. Right? And that's how you need to see the units, I think. Like, this is most optimal for this. But I had a really good conversation once with Tom Layton from the 40k show, and we argued for about 35 minutes about what chaff was. And chaff is anything that's expendable. So, like, your Keeper of Secrets, or like your Frostart Phoenix, or whatever might be your key piece. But if it wins you the game losing it, if it wins you the game having it out of position, one of my favourite things to do, which we'll do when we see in the videos, but you'll see, is to put so when there's an objective on the far edge of a board, I put my unit right against, like the scoring unit right against the edge of the board, like literally like as far away as it can, because I want the offensive unit that's going to go beat it up to just be out of position. I want it to be as far away from the rest of my army as they can be. On something like Total Conquest, when there's 4. Like, I don't put it like right next to the objective. I just put it like right in the corner. So you have to run something, miles, go get it, and then you just.
It's that later on, it's got a hard time getting back into the game.
It's out of the game, and you need to think that through. And sometimes that might be an expensive unit.
But you need to think of that from the word go. You need to think of that from deployment, where you're going to be in turns 3, turns 4, turns 5 when you're taking those objectives, right?
Agreed. Yeah. Right. So deployment, super important. Mine and Darren's favouriteest thing you can ever do. So, long story short, have a plan. Do the deployment game.
There's one more, isn't there? We were going to discuss
establishing dominance. Oh well, let's go through them. Win or lose a game. It does help you win or lose a game. Change the outcome of a tough matchup.
Bait. That's the one I wanted to talk about.
Bait. You would like to talk about bait? Yeah, go for it.
I would like to talk about bait if we can. So trying to manipulate your opponent into going first. You know, you need to bait them out. I've got an example of that. Again, it's at the ETC. I was playing the Seraphon player, and I had deployed. So he had nine razor. What are they called? Razordons.
Well, go cut to video where we'll show it.
Nine. Nine razordons. And they were in a shadow strike formation, so they're in the sky. And I've got my army is all on foot. There's no movement shenanigans other than the gnaw holes, but Seraphon are super good at sort of neutering that. And it's Star Strike, so I want to make sure that I'm the one that's going into turn 2 to get the star, to get the middle piece, because that's the easiest way to win that mission, is to hold the middle and then defend your own. So to get an early lead. So I'm really trying to encourage them to go first. So I want to. The way I do that is by offering up. I've got 2 units of 40 plague monks, and I offer them up as bait. Really, I line out my clan rats along the entire line. We'll see this in the video, won't we? Mm-hmm. So they're in one single line all the way across. Then behind those, at either end, I've got a screaming bell, and then in the middle, I've got a screaming bell and my warps here, and then directly behind them, with enough gap for the razordons to fit, I've got my plague monks in a double line, and then behind those I've then got the rest of my clan rats and plague monks. So there's no way for he can get into the backfield. And the point is, I've made 2 massive holes that are perfect for the razordons to jump over and kill my plague monks. I want him to go first, so it stops him getting the double turn opportunity, gives me the double turn opportunity, and also in that mission where the star comes down in the second turn, I don't want his razordons still in the air. I want them down on the board immediately so I can deal with them. The only way to do that is to encourage him to go first and give him a prize, a real prize. 40 plague monks is a big prize, isn't it? You think losing that would be a bad thing, but in actual fact, turned out really well.
Well, because they're way too cheap.
At the time though, they were
it's something you can afford to lose.
I don't need them to win that game. I felt my Seraphon opponent needed them to win the game. Needed his razordons to win the game, because they can come down at any point and just take off whatever's near the objectives. Ripperdact. There we go. Oh, I play Seraphon. Bloody hell, I really am tired, aren't I? We can edit that out. Come on, probably not. So the
Ripperdactyls.
Fuck me, Ripperdactyls. Shadow Strike Ripperdactyls. So they come down, and it plays out beautifully. He does take the first turn. They do come down. They jump across my clan rats into my... Because I know as well, being a Seraphon player, using Shadow Strike Ripperdactyls, even though I can't remember their name, I know when I'm using them, I'm explaining what they do to my opponent and they're not listening. The amount of times that I've come down and killed a Lord of Change because I'm 3 inches away from them, it astounds me. No, again, that's really important. That win or lose a game, if you don't screen your Lord of Change and you're fighting Shadow Strike Ripperdactyls and you let them go first, you're not playing Warhammer.
Well, you're not understanding the threats.
You're not understanding the threats, yeah. So I know when he, and this goes back to the subterfuge as well. He's explaining what they do, and I say, yeah, that's fine. I know what they do. And I know what he's thinking, what I'm thinking. That guy isn't listening. I'm going to take advantage of this.
Yeah.
So he comes down. He jumps over my screen. He takes out all my plague monks, but they do mortal wounds back on a 6, so that kills 2 of them. And then I've got a monster either side that then get to fight in combat, and then I've got the clan rats that get to fight in combat. So that unit of 9 shrinks down to 2 straight away. None of them die from battle shock, but in my magic phase, because I go second, I magic them off, and that's that massive threat that's going to win the game done, out of the way. And that was all done with baiting, trying to get him to go first. If he'd have let me go first, which is what he should have done, all I could do was move up. I couldn't go very far because I've got to protect my backfield from the 3-inch threat of the ones in the sky coming down. So I wouldn't have got a lot of the field. I think bait is super important.
Yeah, really. Again, because that's a deployment game, right? That's one of the tactics in the deployment game. Similar story of Bait, but the other way around, or maybe the better way to play that game is I played Giannis from Greece, a lovely man, and we were playing Knife to the Heart. Not Knife to the Heart, sorry, Take and Hold. So there are two objectives, one in your opponent's deployment, one in mine. And in order to win, you have to score both. He's playing Seraphon, he's got Shadow Strike with 12 Pterodons. Now, what's interesting about the 12 Pterodons is they need to go and... That's about all he has to go and take the objective that I had. I had 70 or 80
He got
bodies.
12 of them as well, and 12 Pterodons.
Yeah, and I've got 70 or 80 bodies with a 4-up save in my Fireglaves, and I've also got 12 Kadai, which have got 4 wounds apiece, and a 5-up Ethereal save. So I've got a lot of bodies, so those, no matter when those Pterodons come down, they're not going to be able to clear the objective enough in one turn to go and win the game, assuming he takes his. And I know that. But similarly, I don't have enough output in my army to go and clear his army of his objective and leave enough that Shadow Strike unit can't come down
and take advantage. Makes sense.
And take advantage and win the game. So we played this dance off because what he didn't do, even though I had Zangor Shaman, and I deployed my entire army in a kind of bubble on the objective. And then I had my Zangor Shaman just on his own, 6 inches away from the rest of my army. It's just hilarious, just out there. And then he was like, with another unit of 6 Kadai. And they were just stood on their own. Perfect bait. And he didn't take it. Yeah. But that's great for me because they were also in an advantageous place to go and do what I wanted them to do. So then in my turn, I ran the Zangor up. I rang the 6 Kadai up. And then the turn after the priority roll, I start to do the Wildfire Taurus into his army. I didn't get it off, but there's the opportunity there to do it. Yeah, and the 6 Kadai are also now threatening his army. Maybe they're going to go in, start whittling some stuff down. So now he has to put some resources over there, and he's not. But I can only make these small plays to try to draw out the Shadow Strike, and he wasn't doing it.
Yeah.
And he's just there, and
that's a good example. He did well then.
He did really well.
Yeah,
He never at any point took the bait, nor did he give up. This is really important. He never also gave up his advantage. He had this huge advantage, and it went down to turn 5, and whether or not I rolled anything but a 1 on an ability to kill a character off to win the game. And I rolled the 1. But it was an incredible game. But as an example, what that was is
Excuse me.
He had this huge advantage that he had the opportunity to use it at any point, but I couldn't give him the opportunity to use it.
Yeah.
So there's a big, strong play. But what I meant is there's a lot of counterplay in bait and then not taking it. And sometimes, but
got to recognise what's bait, don't you?
Yeah, but also if you can make the bait be something that is useful for you. So I like to give my opponent a cost benefit analysis. They're like, I could take the thing, but if I don't take the thing, he can do something with the thing. So it's not just a mistake like your example.
Yeah.
It's
got consequences not taking it, so it makes it a difficult decision.
Yeah. I think that's harder for your opponent to be able to work through. But is a good example, and again, really well not taken by my opponent.
Yeah.
I always used to do it with the Chaos Mammoth as well, but it wasn't quite as effective. Okay, so our subjects we've covered our win or lose a game. That's what deployment does.
Can do.
You can change the outcome of a tough matchup. It's a good opportunity to analyse your opponent, to understand your opponent's game plan, establish dominance, however that might take effect in the game, whether or not it's you feeling really less stress-free or your opponent feeling stressed. I feel bad advocating your opponent being stressed, right?
It's a competitive game.
Yeah.
So at the top end of it, it is a competitive game, and people want to win, and the people that say they don't, you lying bastards.
you're doing the lying. Yeah.
Or you've had success before. And that's one thing that gets my goat a little bit, is people that say, I don't care anymore. Yeah, but you did care. When you were young, dumb and full of cum, right, you fucking cared, right? Now you've had that success. Don't ever go at all the other people that are young, dumb and full. Yeah. Fucking understand them. You've been there, you bastards.
Yeah. I super care. I super care about
I
winning.
still care.
I love winning games, absolutely. But I really enjoy the games we're talking about. That game I just mentioned about Giannis, where or even Tony P. Both of those examples, I lost that game. But I felt what I was doing was playing. I'm not overly interested in a game where I just take my things, I move them forward, and I win a game. It just feels.
You stand by your decisions. They were the right decisions to make. The outcome wasn't, but you do it again in the similar
100%,
situation.
100%.
Yeah.
But also the gamesmanship, which you guys, if you're new, or even if you're not new, that you can develop. There's so much gamesmanship to learn. So I'm a big advocate. A lot of people talk about it as not being able to be a sport because the game is inherently unbalanced, or we're looking at the activation wars or something like that. I've often seen armies just do very well, and I've been frustrated in some situations by those rules being well in advantage. However, I've seen gamesmanship of such an incredibly high caliber in some different situations in this past year alone.
Mm-hmm.
And those are just the games I've witnessed. I could be at a tournament with 100 people. I'm watching one game. That means there's 50 games where something radical could have happened.
Mm.
I just take a recent example of when I played Nathan in Northern Ireland with his OCR Bone Reapers, unlocking his unit of Mortek Guard by penduluming themselves.
Yeah.
Or not themselves, but Nagash did it to them to unlock them. It was great. It was a counterplay to what I'd done, and it's some good gamesmanship. So it's absolutely a sport in comparison to chess or any other thing that I've ever seen, because there's skill.
Yeah, there's skill and it's competitive.
Yeah, but have you ever made anyone have a mental breakdown yet? That's is that
I've
too
made people
far?
cry.
Is
I've
that
made people
too
cry.
far? What, with joy? All right. Well, Darren, thanks very much for being on.
No, my pleasure.
And for this. So I'm hoping you guys will be able to keep track. I'm hoping that there's going to be some sporting articles, documents, and videos that are going to go on the Honest Wargamer website under deployment. So if you go on there and if you click any of the tabs, you should be able to see it. That should be enough. You can buy Darren a coffee. I'm going to put that in the show notes as well. So you can buy Darren a coffee if you'd like to support him. Because Darren and me would like to... I already do this for a living, and that's thanks to all the wonderful people on Patreon and all the other guys. What I would eventually like to do is be able to have people like Darren and other people. We could create better content if we could support ourselves to do so. There's a lot of knowledge in here, and a lot of knowledge I think we can show. So
I'd like to share it.
Yeah, and I would also like to present it in a format. That's why the Honest Wargame website exists in the way it does. We spent a good portion of our show time. We could have been doing bat reps, which is, in my opinion, incredibly self-serving. I don't mean that to be rude to people who make bat reps, but the idea of just playing Warhammer all week and filming it sounds quite fun. Yeah, I don't think
Yeah, but it's entertaining. Depends what if they're putting it across as this is how you play. That's not necessarily the best way to do it, is it?
No.
But most of them are just for entertainment. I feel I really enjoy them.
No, I have enjoyed some bat reps. What I meant is what we're trying to produce or create is resources for people.
Oh, yeah, I could just come up here and play games with you all day. Yeah.
In a heartbeat.
But yeah,
it's quite hard to sit down and be like adults.
But I'd really like, if there's one person that's listened to any of this and gone, oh, that's a good idea, then that's the point, isn't it?
That is the point. That is the point. And then being able to do that for everyone all across the world. So support Darren by buying him a coffee if you want, or the Patreon. And there is a Patreon tier that I have up and I've had up for a year now of what it would cost to have someone else working with me. So if anyone wants to help us achieve that, that would be great.
Yes, I would.
So thank you very much. And thank you for you. And we'll see everyone soon.